Life was good. The Timskin Rock blared across the park, the bass making Rev's very bones shake as he sat on top of the picnic table, tapping his feet on the bench. He drained his beer, then reached down to prod Mia with his toe for another. She slapped at it with feigned annoyance, but reached into the bag and tossed him one up and over her shoulder. He had to half rise to snag it. "Nice grab," Witter said, barely audible over the music. "Can't be having alcohol abuse now." "Never," Rev said as he held up the drink pack like a trophy and sat back down. He popped the cool tab, then waited as the pack frosted over before taking a long pull. In another 6 weeks he'd be done with school, and 2 after that he'd start his guild apprenticeship thanks to his stepfather. The old man had come through for him, that was for sure. Rev reached over and gently tousled Mia's hair as she leaned into her best friend Laney's ear to tell her something. She ignored the familiarity, but at least she didn't object. He'd known Mia for years, ever since primary, but it wasn't until word got out, leaked by him, that he'd scored the Benevolent Order of Crystal Technicians, that she'd promoted him from one of the guys to her one guy. Rev wasn't uni material. He'd barely been secondary school material, so getting into a guild was pretty impressive. He wasn't under any false impression that he'd made it on his own, but too often it wasn't what you knew, but rather who you knew. And he knew Max Thronson, the man who'd married his mother 9 years ago, and pertinent to Rev getting the position, a full member of the BOCT. It would take Rev 3 years to make journeyman, but once achieved, he'd be home free. He'd never be mega rich, but he'd make a good, secure salary with lifelong benefits, especially with the war going on. The military would always need crystals. It really wasn't surprising that Mia had immediately gravitated to him when she found out about his apprenticeship. School was almost over, and all the kings and queens of campus were starting to look to their futures. Rev wasn't sure he wanted anything long-term with her, but he was more than willing to enjoy her company for a while, and being with her raised him more than a few notches with everyone else. Witter leaned in close to Rev's ear. "Hey, I've been meaning to ask you, do you think your dad can put in a good word for me with the BOCT?" Witter was Laney's boyfriend and someone he'd just met today. There was no way he was going to ask his stepdad anything of the sort, but he didn't want to alienate the guy. "I can't hear you," Rev shouted, pointing to his ear and then to the music pod. Which was somewhat true. Even if he wanted to hold a conversation, the music was blaring, and he wasn't about to spend the evening trying to lip-read. Hopefully Witter would forget to ask him later. He turned away and took another swallow of beer. Across the small park and under the pavilion, about 20 men and women were gaming, jacks plugged into the base of their necks, their eyes closed. Rev rolled his eyes. His stepdad made some of the crystals that made immersive gaming possible. In a way, gamers provided for his family's livelihood. Despite this, his mother thought very little of those who left reality for days on end to live in a fantasy world. Rev adopted his mother's attitude, and he thought immersive gamers were losers. He didn't care much about the casual gamers who only wasted some of their free time. But for the hardcore jackheads, those who withdrew and lived on the government dole, it was a different story. They contributed nothing to society. At least that's what his mother said, and Rev thought there was truth in that. If they didn't work, they weren't paying taxes, relying on the rest of society for their support. Rev didn't know which type those across the small park were, and he didn't care. He wanted to live in the real world. Looking at Mia sitting on the row below him, her long brown hair shining in the park lights, that seemed a much better option. It wasn't as if Rev didn't play games. He gamed like everyone else, but not through jacks, which took the gamer out of the real universe and into a fake one. And it wasn't just because he couldn't get a jack while still a minor. Raised with his parents' work ethic, he just saw the immersive games as an escape by losers who couldn't hack reality. A couple of the jackheads kept glancing at them, sour looks on their faces. The 4 were blaring the music pretty loud, he had to admit, especially if it was bleeding into their games. With a sigh, he stepped down to where Mia and Laney were chatting and reached to the pod to lower the volume. Mia grabbed his wrist. "What are you doing? I like it like this." She pulled his hand away and not only put the volume back, but she increased it until he could feel the bass in his heart. She gave him a dismissive stare before turning back to her friend. Rev wanted to remind her that there were others in the park, but this was Mia Zeth, an A-lister, someone out of his social circle until he scored his apprenticeship.